Here comes the battle. Sacred Band Mist versus Lamus Moon. This is the first semifinal of the day and our first best of three as well. So, for Sacred Band, he'll be bringing the Dark Elves first. His other two factions in reserve are going to be High Elves and Wood Elves. And for Lamus Moon, he'll be bringing the Dwarves to this battle. Also has the High Elves, and then he has the Empire in reserves as well. So, going into the fight now, I will start with the Dowie. And taking a look at what he has brought, it doesn't look like he's going to disappoint. We see two cannons at least, but let's start off with the infantry as we usually do. Going to see here 3 miners, all of them with blasting charges. Going to also be seeing 3 longbeards and 1 unit of longbeards with great weapons. 1 unit of slayers for that anti-large support. And then, aside from that, I think we can just go ahead and get into the ranged. Also, we're going to have a second Slayer, the Dragonback Slayers over there, protecting the cannon, 1 Slayer to each cannon. We have 4 Thunderers. I love this pick. Thunderers are a wonderful unit and can really tear apart heavy infantry that the Dark Elves may bring. And then, aside from the Thunderers and the cannons, we are going to go to our heroes. And the heroes will be a Runesmith with the Rune of Wrath and Ruin, and then a Rune Lord with the Master Rune of Wrath and Ruin and the Rune of Negation. Yep, Master Rune of Negation for 44% damage resistance. Now, this Dowie army, I think, has the tools it needs to win this if it plays them right. But what do the Dark Elves have for us, Romulan?
Now, this Dark Elf army is pretty typical of what you're going to see now with some of the changes to runes. It is a massive infantry rush. Now, this infantry rush consists of 3 Sisters of Slaughter, 2 Witch Elves, one of them being the Sisters of the Singing Doom. As well, there are 2 Argonath Executioners, and there is a front line of 4 Bleak Swords to soak up any initial fire. As well, for some mobility, there is a single Harpy Vanguard in the back lines of the Dowie formation. Now again, for the leadership, we have Sorceress of Shadows. Interesting, it seems she only has Penumbral Pendulum. That's a tongue twister, chat. And she also has Darkstar Cloak, a great item for improved recharge rate, and the passive Smoke Mirrors to help make this army a bit quicker on the approach. And the Lord is
Cool.
none other than Lokir Feldar, Mr. Octopus Face himself. And he has pretty standard kit, Dreaded Duelist, Helm of the Kraken for that regen, as well Merciless Slaver for a passive -4 leadership debuff. And that rounds out this Dark Elf force. They're looking to steamroll this Dowie defensive formation, and we'll see if they'll be able to do so. And let's tell these players to get going. Get into the action, chat.
I'm excited for this round. I think it's going to be fun. It's either going to be the last samurai without horses, except it's just going to be Dowie, Thunderers, and cannons mowing down these poor Dark Elves. Or these Dark Elves will be able to make a hole in the Dowie formations and just overwhelm them completely, because they definitely have a lot of infantry power in this army. But yeah, my money's on the Dowie, though. Got it.
We will see. I don't particularly love this dense Dark Elf formation, but we'll see. With the speed on the flanks, which I'd really like to see this Witch Elf on the flank with the other Sister of Slaughter on the right flank of the Dark Elf formation. Down the center, they're not going to be able to utilize their speed very well. So,
yeah, it's a very good point.
This is essentially the flanking units in the cavalry, if you will, for the Dark Elves. They can get these fast, speedy units up on the flank into the back line, so they'll be in a good position to, from this entire Dowie formation. But look at these Harpies. They are gone. Okay. Thunderers have seen the Harpies, and the Harpies are just sitting there. They're not really doing much.
Nope. I mean, honestly, I guess you don't really want to do anything with them prematurely at this stage in the battle. There's Slayers on top of the cannon, so probably not the best target.
Yeah,
but yeah, still do something.
Yeah, you don't want to sit in Thunder range, so he keenly pulls him back, which is a good move. Just keep them in the back lines, waiting for the opportune moment to jump on these juicy range units. Oh, here we go. Miners on the right flank might get some big blasting charges, but I think they're going to be too slow.
Oh, too slow. And now they're going to pay the price, because Sisters of Slaughter are probably going to make quick work of miners.
They made the mistake of trying to retreat and get a better footing, but they simply were not going to be able to do so with these Fastest of Slaughter
Yeah.
close in their heels, and before they're able to throw any blasting charges, they're getting ripped to pieces, and that's
Yeah.
a big loss.
That's a very convincing victory for the Sisters of Slaughter, too. They're just like taking no damage, just slaughtering them. In come the rest of the Dark Elf forces on that right flank, though, and they're getting, like, the Dowie lines are looking like they're having a hard time stemming the tide of the Dark Elves here. The Thunderers are starting to open fire now, though, and that's what's really going to matter.
Yeah, we'll see how these Thunderers do. I mean, besides, they have Argonauts Executioners, but with the cannons and everything, they're not really the biggest threat. But,
yeah.
We'll see. The Sister of Slaughter seems to be getting into a Thunder on either flank. And, but here we go. Now the Slayers are pulled forward, and Slayers could do pretty well against the Sisters of Slaughter. Or at least, just not the best argument for them on the field.
Yeah. Well, without any large units, besides the caster on the horse, I suppose, looks like the Slayers aren't going to have the best targets, period, you know? There's nothing that they're really wanting to sink their teeth into, their axes into, I should say. And here comes the first Penumbral Pendulum, it seems. And doing a nice little bit of damage. Not the most, but a good bit of damage on top of those Thunderers and Slayers.
Indeed, indeed. And now, Murderous Prowess has procced, and we'll see. The Dark Elves seem to be in some pretty good engagements across the field. Sister of Slaughter into the back lines, essentially winning combat across the entire field.
Yeah.
So this,
The Dragonback Slayers did make quick work of those Sisters of Slaughter, I have to say, but Bleak Swords coming in to keep them pinned down, and yeah, very close fight, and Balance of Power is dead even right now, and the Dowie leadership's still very healthy, so is the Dark Elf leadership, and yeah, I can't really get a good feel on who's going to come out on top right now, but these healthy Sisters of Slaughter on top of the Cannon and the Thunders are definitely concerning. Ooh! Oh! I just saw the tail end of that, but that did quite a lot of damage from what I saw.
And I think that blob and that pendulum on that blob might spell victory for the Dark Elves, despite what the Balance of Power may say. Just in solid engagements across the field, just chewing through the Dowie infantry, and the Thunderers are not in a position to put down suppressing fire, nor do they have good avenues of retreat to try and find stable ground. So yeah, looks like they're just going to be whipped into the warp and be the next sacrifices for Kane.
Seems so. Like, these Dark Elves are having an orgy for tonight, that's for sure. So, congrats to them, but yeah, at this point, I just feel like the Balance of Power is going to start slipping further and further away from our Dowie forces. The Dragonback Slayers are getting taken out by some Bleak Swords. And the Sisters of Slaughter are on top of all the Dowie leadership, so it's just... yeah, this infantry rush seems to have worked out for our Dark Elf player in spite of, to me, what it first seemed like there was a couple bumps in the road on the approach in. So, shout out to the Dowie player, especially with the cannon play. The cannons were doing work for most of the battle.
Yeah, just nothing really for those cannons to shoot. And clearly he needed a flame cannon here, Flame cannon is the obvious choice. But yeah, one can only hope. In most cases, the cannon's just a very safe pick on a map like this, and his army was pretty standard, pretty well built, I'd say. Just with the changes to runes, it makes these mass infantry rushes much more viable, and sometimes very difficult for the Dowie to deal with.
Well, no, I completely agree. And why didn't you go into some of the specifics about those changes to runes for the chat and myself?
So initially, runes in their inception were just a direct damage spell. They had no slow initially, and they're absolutely devastating, especially when the Master Rune was released with the Dwarf DLC. It meant that you could delete elite infantry from the front line, and really could just focus on the other parts of the army, and it forced opponents to essentially eliminate elite infantry from their unit choices, often because it just meant they would be perfect targets for the rune. It also changed your cavalry choices to units which wouldn't suffer from the damage from the rune. It essentially completely changed the way people pick their armies. But now with that damage removed and it simply being a very powerful slow, Yes, it's even better towards chariots, because prior chariots and low model count units did not take much damage from Wrath and Ruin. But now, with the changes to the speed buff, they are very susceptible to being gunned down, as their speed is really their greatest strength. But now with infantry, if you're just deleting their speed, it's not quite such a boon for the dwarves. And because they can't delete mass infantry, sometimes the infantry can just get onto them and just chew them down. Especially in the case of a Sister of Slaughter, which is faster than every dwarf infantry on the field. They can outrun everything, get into a good engagement, get into the cookie jar, and once they make contact, it's a meat grinder, and they just tear the dwarfs to pieces. So with the changes to runes, now chariots, traditional mobile units, which were a bit of a counter to runes and dwarfs themselves, are not quite as viable yet. Just the full infantry rush, without that direct damage from the runes, is much more difficult to deal with, as you need gyrocopters, you need top tier dwarf infantry, or yeah, a couple of range units for doing just that, like Iron Drakes. As Thunderers, you know, it's going to be difficult to get that line of fire unless you really position perfectly. And if you do that, you can put down the suppressing fire, but yeah. So, damage removed, infantry rush stronger.